Everything you just heard came out of a device you already own and have probably decided it isn't for you. It's Looper, and I'll be honest with you, for years I filed it under "that's probably for guitarists," and I was wrong. If you use it properly, it's actually one of the coolest sound design tools in Live, and it does things people buy plugins to do. I'm Heath, Ableton Live coach, helping DJs and producers finish tracks and build their careers. Today, I'll show you what Looper actually is, what it isn't, and how to use it to build layered synth sounds, turn your return tracks into playable instruments, and drag the results straight out and into your track. So, without further ado, let's take a look at Ableton Live's Looper. So, just for context, what we've got going on in the session here, we've got a drum track that's really just for some drums and vibe and context. Then we've got a synth track and all Ableton devices on here. We've got the SQ sequencer from Ableton Live with a 16-step sequence. And then we've got an instrument rack with a couple of Ableton Live wavetable lead preset patches. So if something catches your ear, these are available inside of Ableton Live in your browser. Moving along, then we've got our looper track. This is an audio track with a looper on it. I'm going to show you how the looper's set up and then also the track. And then for context or for recording outputs of some of the work in today's video, we've got two audio tracks alongside that. I'll show you what they do in a bit and how they're routed. So starting with the looper track, let's open that track up and let's grab a default looper from the browser, put it alongside the one I'm using, and I'll just show you a couple of things I've changed. If we look at the bottom right corner of the looper, we'll see there's a section related to input and output, and it's set by default to always. I've turned mine over, or I've changed mine to say never listen to the input all the time. I don't want it listening to the input all the time. And then the sort of lower middle section of the looper, we've got this section that's tied a little bit to song control and tempo control. And in the song control section, again, by default, it's set to start of song. I've set mine to none. I'm not really interested in working with a looper that way. And then quite interestingly, above that, we've got this section where we can set the looper up to record a fixed amount of bars and then an action happens. By default, there is no fixed length of bars set, and the default action is currently overdubbing. So I've set mine up to actually record or capture 2 bars in the buffer of the looper, and then once those 2 bars are captured, it's going to play that back. So you can see here we can toggle the action over from overdub to playback. So that's it for the changes I've made to the looper itself. Or hang on a second, is it? Because there's one last thing. Given that it's a looper, we can use it in looping settings with foot pedals and controllers, and so it's a very mappable effect, right, and device. So Command K, I'm using a keyboard mapping here so that I can capture and toggle the looper nice and easily with a key on my keyboard. A small tip there is choose a key that you rarely use, right? Something a bit of an odd key that you hardly use, question marks, exclamation marks, things like that. Because sometimes if you choose a key that's an obvious one, it might already be doing something else in Ableton Live and you end up triggering more than one thing that you actually don't want to happen. So we've set that up, Command K to come out of there, and then we're now going to have our first, or set up our first example of the looper. So back to the synth track, let's turn that on. Let's choose a synth. I've got one, or the chain turned on here. I've turned the volume down a little bit because that one was particularly a loud patch. And then I'm going to capture that into the looper as my first example of using the looper. So let's hit play and let's do our first capture here. And something's happened there and it hasn't worked, and that's actually a really good thing because now I can show you the fix. So it's my error, and what it is that when we haven't looked yet at the looper track itself, and the looper track itself, it's an audio track, and it is set up quite good except for what just happened now, and that is very crucially the audio from should be a reflection of what you want to come into the looper. I had it set to something else. We're going to do that setup later. but right now it should be pointing at the synths, which is what I actually want in here. And then in is correct for the monitoring, and if you want to hear what the looper plays back directly, you can have the bottom toggled on, and if you don't, you can leave it toggled off. You'll see what I mean in a second. So let's try that. Take 2, let's clear the looper, and here we go. And now you can see there's an audio signal on the looper track. So now we can turn off the synth track, and if we turn on the looper track, we should hear that synth sound exactly the same as we just heard it, playing back now in the buffer of the looper. Which is exactly what we have. Now that's great, and probably arguably you would agree with me that that isn't anything too special right now, in the sense of there's many ways we could get our synths out, or that synth out, and record it into an audio clip or into audio, or bounce in place and turn it from MIDI to audio. So we're not doing anything unique just yet. So let's start with the first thing that I spoke about, and that is we're going to use the looper to layer synths. So back into the synth track, back into the instrument rack, I'm going to arm this, or turn on the chain of the next synth in the rack. Let's have a listen to that. And as you can hear, that's a pad sound. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to capture that and layer that against my first synth inside of the looper. And what is great about the looper, as you can see now that I've got something captured, is that the actual capture or record button has now switched to overdub. And so it's ready. Basically, I'll toggle my same hotkey on, and it will now capture that next layer on top of this synth. So let's go for that. Okay, so now let's switch tracks and have a listen to what we've got. And that's where looper starts to get interesting. We've now just created our very first sort of layered synth. And again, you can layer synths other ways. We can put the 2 in the rack and turn them on, but this is kind of interesting because they're both there. And now you'll see what we can kind of do with this layer or the buffer of the looper. So we could continue adding layers, by the way, overdubbing, and think creatively, ladies and gents. You know, this doesn't have to be 2 synths. It can be field recordings, vocals, percussion. You know, you can make some incredibly interesting clips and loops here with any sorts of source material, and that's kind of a lot faster and a lot more original than looking for it on Splice. We're just working with 2 Ableton wavetable presets, a sequencer and the looper, and we're getting a clip, which we'll see in a moment, that's really, really interesting and original. So something we can do, just to point out that last layer that we added of the sort of pad synth, we can undo it if you don't quite capture the loop how you want it, so the note sort of cuts off or doesn't sustain. You can undo it down here, and then you can record again. So it's clean, just the 1 synth, but I'm going to put redo back in, which you can also do if that was a mistake. So now where the looper gets really interesting is if I've got this audio track over here alongside, which I have, I can now go to the top of the looper here, go drag me, and I can drag exactly what we hear in the buffer straight over here onto this audio track. And this is what I'm speaking about. Now I've got that audio clip, just like that. And again, with our creative caps on, I can resample this audio clip, put it through, run it through some effects, send it to some returns, and away we go. So that's a very fast workflow to come up with an interesting clip straight out of the looper. That's the layered synths. So let's go back to the looper. And now let's look at a couple of things the looper can do. And keep in mind as well that the output of the looper here could contain effects. And like I said, we can send looper to return tracks, which we are going to do, but more on that in a moment. So the looper itself has a couple of cool things where you can change what's going on in the buffer here, both in terms of reversing layers and also changing the speed of the layers, much like an old school tape style effect. And if you use the up and down arrows, you are changing the speed or pitch in terms of octaves. And if you go and grab the macro, you're moving in terms of semitones and cents. So let's have a little play with this. So the reverse is pretty straightforward as to what it sounds like. Let's go for a pitch down. And it reacts like real-time tempo and pitch, that it changes the speed. That's the point of it. So we're going up and down in speed. Let's do a manual one of, like, say 4 semitones would be nice as an interval. So let's choose a musical kind of interval here on the macro itself and dial that in. You can also type it in, of course, so let's do that. It's a bit quicker. Okay. And we can combine things. So the other thing that's interesting about this is you can come up with variations for that first loop, and this is great for building out tracks and having an A, B, C version, or as many as you like. So the next thing I want to point out to you is the drag me only takes what's in the buffer. So if I dragged right now another clip from here, it would be exactly the same as what I already have, the 2 layered synth. If I want to capture the reverse and the speed changes, I need to use this other audio track I've got set up. I need to make sure that's listening to the looper, which it is. It's in and it's armed, and there I can record the output of the looper. You can change it in real time. And all of that is getting captured over into this clip, and there it all is. So all of that goodness into there. So essentially, there's 2 things going on here. I think that's great as a way for, as I said, coming up with variations or iterations of the clip, and continuing to, you know, build from perhaps where you started. So we can use both the drag and the records. And then if we look at something like what we've got, and we send it over to the reverb over here, just Ableton's default C reverb return. What we could do now that would be interesting maybe with that is we could use that as another layer. So this is what I mean about iterations, right? So I could actually go back to the looper, go audio from the reverb, and now capture that as another overdub inside of the looper. So let's go for that. And now I'm going to take the C send off. And that's inside of the looper. So as you can see, it gets more and more interesting. And because that is now an overdub layer, then the drag me works. And now I get a new clip over here, including the reverb version. Okay, now we're going to switch things up and look at the other thing that I love about the looper. So for production, sound design, the first method here, really amazing, coming up with different clips, layering things up, having a lot of fun with the way the buffer works. Now I'm going to clear the buffer, and what we're going to look at is basically something I've been working on in production, but also with live performers, which is a lot of live performers want to live sample something that's going on in their performance. And a great way to do that is with loopers, like capturing things during your performance. But one thing that I think that's really interesting that a lot of people aren't maybe always intuitively capturing is what comes out of some of the returns. So setting up return tracks to create feedback and various sort of like affected sounds that you can then use almost like an instrument or their very own layer. So what I've done is I've got a couple of returns set up here. I've got one which is the Ableton delay with a limiter after it, and that we're going to use to create the feedback loop. And so if we look carefully at the B return track, I've enabled the B return so that it can send back on itself. So whatever comes into this B delay is going to also feed back on itself. And so that's example number 1 of the return, and then I've got another one over here which I've kind of set up, and actually I'll just click around in here for a second just to reset it a little bit, because we'll set it up from scratch in a second. What have I got there? Soft, let's go back to soft, so they're both default, and we'll pop in here and clear a couple of things out, something I was doing before, and that should be like that. And then for the grain delay, we're going to do something similar, so just reset that back up to pretty much how it is by default. And the hybrid reverb, let's put the dry wet to 100%, and that's about it. We'll switch that off. We'll come back to that return in a little bit. So now I'm going to go to the synth track, go back to my first synth, turn the synth track on. We've cleared the looper, right? Yes, we have. And now what we want to do again is be careful here, because I would have made a mistake again. I need to now change my input back to the synths. Okay, so the synth is going into the looper track, and well, actually, I'm going to change my mind on that. So it's actually going to be the B delay, but more on that in a second. So the first job we want to do is set up our feedback loop. And I'm going to be gentle with this because I don't want to like set anything up that goes too wild and too crazy. So let's sort of say we set up our feedback so they're gentle. We want this feedback that's over in this track here, right? And once it's in there, see if we can keep it alive. It might have been a bit too gentle, so we're going to have a second go at that. We'll just make it a little bit stronger, because once we get that feedback dialed in there, then we can keep it in there. So let's go back. A second go. Okay, so now the feedback's in there, right? Now we're going to go to the looper track, and it's set to listen to that B delay, and we're going to capture that into the looper. Okay, so now we can turn off the looper track, turn off the delay return that we were using, and now we've got our feedback in this looper, right, in the buffer of the looper. And what's great about that, which is what I was speaking about with live performance, is I can bring that fader down while I'm playing out live, and I could be working in my track, and I've got all the time this fader I can bring up with whatever I've captured inside that looper. And if it's was actually interesting, by the way, so we can go back to but more or less what we want to do now is with this looper track that's got this feedback loop in it, not only is it like an instrument or a sound that we can bring in and out, and again we can capture anything we want into this looper from wherever we want. In this case it's the return. Well, now I've got that feedback in there. I want to show you where that can go in its own right. And so that could be fed over to the reverb if we want, but I want to feed it to the AFX that I built. And I want to start playing around a bit with that. So the feedback loop is now coming over to here, and now let's play with the grain delay first. And let's add a bit of raw. Same with the mids. And then let's get a little movement in the raw. So let's have the filter frequency cutoff of the mid frequency band down a little bit. Pop over to the matrix, and we'll get this moving with an LFO. Let's maybe set it to something like triangular and free rate. So if you want it note synced, you can, whatever sort of movement you're looking for. If you want it quite glitchy. And then we could do something different here. We could maybe have the bias into the matrix. Could use the same LFO. And get that kind of weird rhythm, right? Keep in mind, this is all happening to the feedback loop, right? So I'm going to use 2 LFOs to move that, so it's a bit more interesting. Then we can have the reverb. Or phase flanger, for example. And again, anytime I want, it's a living, breathing track in its own right. What's inside the looper, right? Really interesting. And so what we can remember is whatever's in the buffer here, which is the original feedback loop, would drag out as a clip. But given that we're sending this over to A and C right now, if I go to the record in track and I switch it over to maybe say resampling, I can now again capture what's going on with the looper track plus what it's doing going through those returns and create another new audio clip. And suddenly over here now we've got this, you know, and we can gain it up a bit. I'll actually move it to this track, is a little bit easier to work with. So we'll come over to here, I'll leave that set to in resampling mode. And then like I was saying, you know, when you get really creative with this kind of thing, this can be repitched, this can be sent through more effects. I can go in here and play around with various parameters. And onwards and onwards. So that's a good look at Looper. Couple of use cases using feedback in it as what we've captured in the buffer, and then treating that like its own instrument and own track. And like the thing that excites me is, as I said, whatever you choose as your audio input here can be captured in the looper, and it can be return tracks. So you can process things, and it can be the processing that becomes what's being held in the looper. So I hope you've enjoyed that exploration of the looper. It is really something that's a lot more than just about guitars. It is really good for sound design. It's really good for coming up with quick clips and audio and interesting layers of textures and sounds together that stop us reaching for splice and sample packs and all that good thing. So if you have enjoyed this video and found it beneficial, please do push those buttons. It helps the channel a lot. And I'd also just like to say, if this video has got you thinking a bit about what else is possible in your music production, I do one-on-one sessions, coaching sessions for producers and DJs who want to take their music seriously and upgrade their skills. If you're curious about that and how I can help you with your music, you will find links below in the description to book a free call and we can have a chat. On that note, girls and guys, keep on creating. Take care, everybody, and I'll catch you all very soon in another video or a live stream. Take care, everybody, and ciao for now.